All right, welcome back, everyone. So, a lot of stories to go into. So, remember how we were talking about how there was a request to get data from the FDA, especially particularly on their approval of the Pfizer vaccine? Folks, they now want 75 years before they fully release this data to the public. If I'm still alive in 75 years and I'm over 110 years old, maybe I can give you all an update on what's happening with it. But right now, it seems that they want to wait till most people are very, very old or dead before they tell us what is in the vaccine and their process of approving it for the public that they're now trying to force everybody to take. They claim that they have to redact some information. Folks, I'll be explaining this, tell you what's going on with it. Also, big changes in China. Something very big has happened, which we've been saying is probably going to happen for a while. Folks, Evergrande has now defaulted. This is one of the largest real estate companies in the world, and one of the cornerstones also, one of the cornerstones also of the Chinese economy when it comes to real estate. Folks, it's not clear what the ripple effect's going to be yet. It very likely will have some effect. We don't yet know. But this is just one brick in a very big wall of a dying market, essentially, in China, which is the real estate market. Um, we don't yet know what the impact of this is going to be. I'll be explaining some of what we do know, folks. So stick around for that. And also, I know you were asking about some election updates. We were talking about that last episode. Folks, there's some new updates with these election investigations. And guess what? There's some key data which you are normally legally allowed to get, specifically around voter registration type information. Folks, it turns out that some different parts of the US, they're outsourcing this data. And because they're outsourcing it, the companies they're outsourcing it to claim that it goes against their contracts to be able to show it to you. And it seems that this is one of the big problems we've had in the 2020 election is that information normally publicly available, things normally legally available to the public are not being made available to the public because many different states and different areas are outsourcing this to private companies that do not allow the data to be shown to the public, raising some serious concerns about this. Also, some new updates as well with Zuckerberg of Facebook and his connections with some of these companies that had to do messing with the elections, fortifying the elections, I believe, as they called it. Folks, stick around for that. Also, real quick, we do have a new YouTube channel that is Crossroads Highlights. And as you know, we are demonetized, but this is one of our ways of getting around the censorship and demonetization. Folks, you can find it linked on the homepage of the show you're watching right now, Crossroads. You can also find it in the description below. So please like and subscribe, tell your friends about it, help us get the word out, and help us grow that new channel because hopefully we can get away from the censorship somehow through that. That said, folks, let's jump into the first story for the night. And as always, a good seeing you all here. Hey, Florida girl, good seeing you. You said, yeah, about a lot of things. Yeah. James, California said, howdy, Texas. Seabass, 75 years, people would be dead or very old. I mean, even if you were, even 75 is a decent age, right? They don't want people knowing this information. That's the reality of it. Anybody who has been impacted this is going to be very old or possibly dead by the time they want to have this information released. And frankly, when people are having to pretty much put their faith in an institution, when they're having an unknown substance essentially injected into their bodies, you would think that letting them know what's in it would be one of the corner points of it, or letting them know the process through which it was verified would be a normal thing to do. They're not doing that. Folks, let's start off with there tonight. I want to talk about the FDA is doing. It says here, FDA says it now needs 75 years to fully release Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine data. It says the Food and Drug Administration is asking a judge to give it 75 years to produce data concerning the Pfizer and BioNTech vaccine, up 20 years from the previous request. Remember, previously, they said they needed 55 years. Now they're saying they need 75 years. The FDA told the court it can work faster than its previously proposed 500 pages per month rate, but it also said there were more than 59,000 more pages than mentioned in an earlier finding. That discovery and a desire to make sure it can work on other Freedom of Information Act requests at the same time prompted the fresh request to the judge to allow production of roughly 12,000 pages by January 31st, 2022, and 500 pages per month thereafter. That timeline would take it until at least 2096. So, folks, in the year 2096, maybe we can get an idea of what the approval process was for the Pfizer vaccine, which is now being mandated in parts of the U.S. and many parts of the world. Now, Aaron Seary, a lawyer working on the case, explained this in a blog post. A bit further, and I won't go over the whole story, but it says the case was brought on behalf of the public health and medical professionals for transparency, which stated that the FBI was not complying with its request for data in a timely manner. Well, folks, we'll see where this goes. A bit more information on this, though. Having a lot of information and documents released to the public under FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act requests, is not an abnormal thing. And so it's very strange that they are asking for such a ridiculously long amount of time to make this information public. They're suggesting they have to redact a lot of information. But folks, it's not like we're dealing with, criminal cases or information that has a lot of people's names we would normally assume. This is very likely medical information and processes of medical analysis. And so why would they need to redact this if it's for a vaccine and not things that may, let's say, put people's lives in danger other than maybe people looking to take it? Who knows what they need to redact that would justify them asking 75 years for the process of going through them in order to release them like that. Of course, you be the judge on that. We'll see also if it gets approved, because it's kind of a ridiculous request just based on how FOIA requests typically do work. All right, folks, that said, of course, we are totally demonetized by YouTube still. I have mentioned we have a couple different platforms now. We have Epic TV. I know many of you watching at Epic TV, and thank you for being here. Folks, we also have a new YouTube channel that's Crossroads Highlights. Be sure to check out the link in the description below. That's our new uncensored channel. And also, folks, luckily we do have sponsors. And tonight's episode is brought to you by American Hartford Gold. Now, I'm sure I'm not the only one who's noticed certain things getting more expensive. With a government that's printing trillions of dollars, inflation is on the incline, not to mention the Chinese Communist Party now defaulting in its real estate industry, which we'll talk about as well. Folks, if the government continues this money printing and spending, the dollar could lose its coveted role as the reserve currency for the world. So it's with much appreciation that I introduced today's show sponsor. That's American Hartford Gold, which is giving some ideas on how to diversify your money, your retirement, and your savings. American Hartford Gold can help give you options to diversify with a portion of your portfolio in physical gold and silver. They also make it easy to move your existing IRA or 401k market into a precious metals IRA. They make it easy to do so. They're one of the highest rated firms in the country with an A+ rating from the BBB and thousands of satisfied clients. If you call them right now, they'll give you 1 ounce of free silver for every ounce of gold you buy. And folks, you can call them at 877-260-2764 or text Joshua to 65532. Again, that's 877-260-2764, or you can text Joshua to 65532. And big thanks out again to American Hartford Gold for sponsoring tonight's episode. All right, folks, a lot to talk about. Those of you curious, tonight's tea is a Taiwanese mountain tea. Very good, kind of like between black tea and green tea. Anyone looking for a nice alternative? A little more like oolong. It's very nice. Folks, let's talk about what's happening now. In addition to the FDA asking for 75 years, possibly, to let us know what's actually, the process through which they took to approve this vaccine for public use, to claim that it's safe, to claim that people's kids should take it for that matter. Folks, Dr. Fauci is now looking to possibly redefine the definition of what it means to be vaccinated. And it says here, Fauci, definition of fully vaccinated will be changed. It's a matter of when, not a matter of if. It says here, the definition of fully vaccinated in the United States will be changed. Dr. Anthony Fauci said this on Wednesday. And he said it's going to be a matter of when, not if. That's according to Fauci, again, the head of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. And he said this during an interview on CNN. Folks, currently the term fully vaccinated, as they put it in terms of how it's defined with the vaccines, these COVID-19 vaccines, it typically right now is defined as someone who receives 2 doses of the Pfizer or Moderna vaccines or a single shot of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. This does raise some beliefs or some concerns around whether they're going to end up mandating the booster shots. Because remember, a lot of areas in the US, they have vaccine mandates. President Joe Biden is looking to mandate the vaccine for private businesses, any company with 100 or more employees. That's currently blocked by the court. The Republicans in the Senate actually managed to block this. They got a few Democrats with them as well. Biden's going to veto it. It's not going to get approved. But folks, they're trying to mandate this across the country. Many people in the armed forces and nurses and so on also already being forced to take it or possibly lose their jobs. The big question now, folks, is whether they manage to, approve this, whether they manage to get these mandates through, is whether they can change the definition of what it means to be vaccinated. Because if they change the definition, it goes from needing 2 vaccines, 2 vaccinations, or 2 shots of the Pfizer or Moderna or one of the Johnson & Johnson, or maybe more. They're talking about booster shots. Already they're suggesting 3. Some parts of the world, it's already 3. In Israel, for example, it's already 3 shots, meaning the 2 shots normally and then the booster shot. But folks, this may change yet again, almost as on cue with Dr. Fauci talking about the statement again. It's not going to be a matter of when. It's going to be a matter of when, not if. Because, folks, the Pfizer CEO is now saying this. This is a quote. He says, "I think we will need the 4th dose." 4 doses now. Now, remember, it was 2 doses. Then they were suggesting maybe 3 doses. Now the head of Pfizer is saying 4 doses. They have not yet technically redefined what it means to be vaccinated in terms of how many vaccines you need to get injected into you before you have your freedoms back. But they're now suggesting 4 is the amount you need if you're going to protect yourself from the Omicron virus, which does not yet appear to be showing any serious symptoms yet in the US. Now, on that note as well, folks, people were wondering why the NIH under Fauci and again his boss, why they removed the mention of gain of function from their website. Well, the Epoch Times actually filed a FOIA request, a Freedom of Information Act request, to find this out. And folks, we got a response back on it. They're saying this now. They says, no documents exist explaining why officials decided to remove the definition of gain of function research from the National Institutes of Health website. The agency told this to the Epoch Times. Now, the NIH site used to include a 232-word definition of the research, but it was removed around the same time the agency disclosed that research it funded in China met the definition. Isn't that funny, folks? Remember, technically, a bit of background on this. Basically, you had Fauci, other folks going and testifying before Congress. Fauci possibly lied in front of Congress, possibly lied about the nature of the research they were financing in China by specifically denying that they were doing gain of function research. Now, the issue with gain of function research, where you're taking existing viruses and you're adding functions to them, right? Gaining function, gain of function, specifically making them more deadly, more able to infect human lungs, and doing things that, look a whole lot like the COVID-19 vaccine, like the horseshoe bat virus experiments, for example. The issue, folks, is that in their definition with the Chinese Communist Party, they didn't actually call it gain of function. They merely described gain of function in terms of the research that they were financing. And what happens around the time when this starts to come out in the public, and when it starts to come out in the public, when it looks like they actually stopped the story from being investigated, stopped the investigation of the origin of the virus, one of the most fundamental things you would need to know if you actually wanted to stop a pandemic. And here we are over a year on, we still don't know what the real origin of this virus is. What does he do? They change the definition. They remove the definition from their website. They pretend it doesn't exist. They scrub it. And folks, on this, the alteration on their website happened sometime between October 19th and October 21st. Now, we were curious at the Epoch Times on why they did that. The Epoch Times submitted a Freedom of Information Act request for any communications and other documents from between October 1st and October 25th relating to the change, which had been authorized by the NIH Office of Communications and Public Liaison. Folks, the request was closed this week. The NIH told the Epoch Times that it, quote, does not have documentation on the change other than the updated page. And so they're saying, well, it just changed. Pretty much we don't know how it changed. It just changed on the website around the same time when we were getting accused, or they were getting accused of financing this research in China and possibly lying before Congress. So we'll see what happens with that. Maybe they'll get charged in the future. Maybe folks will get taken in for lying to Congress. We will see. Probably not. We'll see, but maybe. All right, folks. Now, in China right now, something big has taken place, something we've been talking about for a while now, and something we've been anticipating, which is Evergrande, one of the largest real estate companies in the world, and also one of the foundation real estate companies in China, which accounts for close to 30%, roughly, of the CCP's GDP. Meaning, of course, any country that has been investing a lot of money in China, for example, companies that might be putting government employees' pensions in China, i.e. in the United States, which has been happening with many different government offices. Folks, we may soon feel the impact as things start to change in China because this is now happening. The wave has come. Now, we'll see how it affects us, but it is now here. It says this, folks. This is Bloomberg. It says China Evergrande Group has officially been labeled a defaulter for the first time. The latest milestone in a months-long financial drama that's likely to culminate in a massive restructuring of the world's most indebted developer. Now, on this, Fitch Ratings cut Evergrande to restricted default over its failure to make 2 coupon payments by the end of the grace period on Monday, a move that may trigger cross defaults on the developer's $19.2 billion of debt. Now, the downgrade comes just after, minutes after, Fitch applied the same default label to Kaisa Group Holdings Ltd., which failed to repay a $400 million bond that matured on Tuesday. Today, the two companies account for about 15% of the outstanding dollar bonds sold by the Chinese developer. Now, on this, the big question is, what does it mean for the world? There's a few different parts to this, which we'll get into. Hey, Russell Warner, you hit it right on the head. He said, with Evergrande failing, will BlackRock fail too? BlackRock Investment is the one that's been putting government pensions into China, in the U.S. government pensions into China, and has also been investing in the CCP. Even George Soros has been telling them to divest. It seems they've been ignoring those requests. We'll see how it affects us. It's not quite clear how this is going to affect us just yet. Let me explain it. Business Insider reported this. It says the Evergrande crisis, 4 questions that explain why China's property market, which is twice as big as America's and where 20% of homes are empty, matters. Now, I won't go over the whole thing, but it says this. The global conversation around Evergrande has turned a series of big questions, including whether China's central government will bail out the giant and what Evergrande's long-term impact on the real estate sector will be. While my analysts are now overwhelmingly predicting that Beijing will not bail out Evergrande, one individual, Dr. Shin Soon, a senior lecturer in Chinese and East Asian business at King's College London, told Insider the long-term impact on the housing market and the entire company is still highly uncertain. In other words, folks, we don't actually know what the impact is going to be. We don't know what the wave is going to be, but take this and couple with the other different factors we're seeing, which is the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, telling Chinese people right now to begin stockpiling food. News around the world that there may be not only a food crisis, but even a medicine crisis of key medicines because of the shipping crisis which is another factor in all this. Now, the food crisis has many different elements to it, such as, for example, poor crop yields in Brazil, such as flooding in China, such as, remember, we talked about last year, the floods and so on. Even then, talking about possible food shortages. On top of that, the energy crisis. Not only that, but you had flooding in different Chinese coal mines that were supposed to bail out the Chinese Communist Party. And then amidst all of this, the shipping crisis and so on affecting the United States and congestion at U.S. ports, what does the CCP do? It shuts down its own ports, causing even more congestion, making the problem much worse. And folks, take all of this together, and you have really a perfect storm. It looks like if you wanted to intentionally destroy the global economy, this is what it would look like. Now, I'm not saying they're doing this intentionally, but it could be that something got maybe out of hand, and who knows what's going on with it. We'll look into it a bit more, folks. Let you know what we find, and we'll keep you updated as well as we find out more information on Evergrande and what's going on, and especially what it means for us, like I said, as we go forward, and how it's going to affect possibly the U.S. dollar as well. Because remember, the dollar is the reserve currency for most of the world, and a lot of the Chinese Communist Party puts a lot of money into it as well. We will see, folks. Now, that said, around the halfway point, we'll go into questions. So if you have questions, leave them in the chat. We'll try to get to them. And folks, let's talk now about the elections and how the election of 2020 was fortified. And now we see that not only was the election fortified, but it seems even that key information on what actually happened and key information normally available to the public has also been fortified between different agreements and different contracts with private businesses, which are now blocking it from being shown to the public. Let me explain, folks. Now, this is in Washington, D.C. It says the Board of Elections has been sued to keep voter data secret. They are suing to keep voter data secret. A few different parts to this, I'll explain them. Now, it says here, first of all, a good government group is suing the District of Columbia in federal court for refusing to allow, suing them for refusing to allow the inspection of voter list maintenance records, which is required by federal law. The D.C. Board of Elections claims it cannot provide the voter list maintenance documents because of a contract it has with a private company. The Electronic Registration Information Center, the acronym ERIC, which is a nonprofit that describes its mission as assisting states to improve the accuracy of America's voter rolls and increase access to voter registration for all eligible citizens. Now, this company, ERIC, was created in 2012 with the assistance of the Pew Charitable Trusts, a left-wing philanthropy group. The board says its contract with ERIC prohibits the release of the data ERIC provides to member states. In other words, folks, information that you're required by federal law to have access to. They are required by federal law to allow access to this data. The public now is being denied access to this data that they are required, again, through public law to give to them if asked, because they're claiming that their contract with the private company restricts them from doing so, which raises a few questions, which is one, the legality this company is using to avoid federal law, and two, the legality of different states or different election boards working with companies that they have contracts that force them to possibly violate federal law. We'll see how this unfolds, folks, because again, they're now suing to get this information public. The board says its contract with ERIC prohibits the release of data that ERIC provides to member states. Now, the District of Columbia, which along with 31 states, folks, outsources the maintenance of its voter rolls to ERIC, this company that, again, is able to somehow bypass federal law because of its contract process. ERIC regularly provides the district board with reports showing which registered voters are no longer eligible because they have died or relocated, supposedly, right? The National Voter Registration Act of 1993, however, says that all records used to add or remove voters are public record. Yet the board denied a group's request to inspect the reports ERIC provides to the board, even though, again, the board would be legally required to provide that. Now, according to the Public Interest Legal Foundation, which brought this lawsuit, this company, Eric, has a history of inaccuracy in removing deceased and other ineligible registrants from its own voter rolls, which also raises some questions about the integrity of this company itself. Now, on this as well, because it seems this is a trend right now, this is Gateway Pundit reporting. It says huge Wisconsin election hearing reveals 119,283 active voters who have been registered for over 100 years. Now, folks, maybe there are people who've been registered to vote for over 100 years, and somehow these 100-plus-year-old voters, they'd have to be over 118 years old now, I suppose, actively voting somehow. Maybe we just have this huge population of over 119,000 active voters who are over 118 years old, specifically in Wisconsin, or maybe there's something strange afoot. It says this. The Wisconsin Committee on Campaigns and Elections hearing began at 2 p.m. on Wednesday. Damning evidence of fraud was revealed. Last week, former Wisconsin Supreme Court Justice Honorable Mitchell Gableman testified in front of this committee, and Gableman is leading an election review in the state. At the hearing, he threatened to subpoena, get this, a Zuckerberg, as in Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook, employee and former Obama operative on this. Now, folks, you have, again, over 119,000 active voters who've been registered over 100 years, which raises some serious questions about the legitimacy of these active voters, specifically on the voter rolls in Wisconsin. You have a company called Eric that runs these voter rolls and prevents the information from being released to the public, operating in, again, more than 30 states. Now, get this, Liz Harrington, the spokeswoman of former President Donald Trump, also wrote this on Twitter, saying smoking gun election interference. Emails reveal Milwaukee official. So we talked about Wisconsin, Washington, D.C., now Milwaukee official giving Democrat operatives, again, funded by Mark Zuckerberg, she's saying, of Facebook, like in the issue in Wisconsin, direct access, specifically, again, to Wisconsin's election database, to active voters, absentee applications, ballots received, ballots rejected before and during the election. And get this, folks. Now that we've heard about Zuckerberg possibly playing a role in this issue they're having with over 100,000 active voters, at least tied to it, maybe directly or indirectly, get this, folks, another story here that the Zuckerberg-backed election influence group founder, remember how he was putting all this money into the elections? The founder served at a Chinese state-funded center pushing Beijing's, the CCP's, propaganda. Let me explain. It says here, the founder of the Center for Tech and Civic Life, a controversial election oversight group, heavily backed by Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg, is a former fellow at the Chinese regime-funded Ash Center, which has also advised Chinese Communist Party officials sanctioned by the U.S. government for human rights abuses. Now, the Center for Tech and Civic Life, CTCL, used the hundreds of millions of dollars from the Facebook Foundation's organization. In other words, he was working with this organization, right? The Chan Zuckerberg Initiative to overrule local election officials and increase turnout in almost exclusively Democratic districts, something even questionably legal in itself. Now, proving the partisan conflict of interest, leaders from the CTCL overpowered and overruled local election authorities through coercion, accessed mail-in ballots ahead of the election. Tiana Epps Johnson co-founded the CTCL in 2012 with co-workers from the New Organization Institute, NOI, described by the Washington Post as, quote, the Democratic Party's Hogwarts for digital wizardry. That's the Washington Post saying that. A bit more on this, folks. CTCL appeared to play a similar role in the 2020 election, helping secure a victory for Joe Biden, the Chinese Communist Party's preferred candidate, as they made clear as well. The National Pulse can reveal, however, it says, that Johnson is affiliated with Harvard University's Ash Center, which has extensive financial and personal links to the Chinese regime, the Chinese Communist Party. Now, folks, great reporting. I won't go over the whole story. That's National Pulse has that one. Briefly as well, the Epoch Times also reports that vulnerable, moderate Democrats are beginning to break with Biden more frequently as the midterms approach, which again also suggests some level of panic as we near the midterms. And a lot of them want to decouple themselves from Biden's persona and Biden's policies, it seems, as we go into the midterms. Now, we'll see what happens, folks. Some updates on the elections. That said, let's jump into some questions. So if you do have questions, leave them in the chat. We'll try to get to them. First of all, though, folks, again, we are demonetizing this channel. We have a new channel. Be sure to check it out. That's Crossroads Highlights. Folks, please subscribe to our new channel. Hit the notification bell. Hopefully, this will help us get around the censorship. Hopefully, we can get this show, really going strong again in terms of not being censored by YouTube. And folks, again, that's in the description below. Also, we have a new video platform, our own video on demand platform, which is Epoch TV, epochtv.com/crossroads. You can find the link to that in the description as well. And folks, those of you watching on Epoch TV, thank you for being here. Folks, we also have a lot of different shows on Epoch TV. One of them is American Thought Leaders, and they've had some really great stuff lately. One of the recent episodes is on China's communist leaders trafficking, selling human organs. It's an interview with Robert Destro on genocides of both the Uyghurs and of Falun Gong practitioners. Folks, I'll show you a quick trailer of that now.
And if I learned anything in the State Department, it's follow the money.
A regime committing not one, but perhaps 3 genocides.
You're not supposed to look, because that then blows up the Green New Deal. The reality is it's a Red New Deal. All that money goes to China.
A moral question facing many major corporations in America today.
Do you really want to rely on somebody who's stealing somebody's liver?
In this 2-part episode, I sit down with Professor Robert Destro, former Assistant Secretary of State for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, DRL. He is also a law professor at the Catholic University of America's Columbus School of Law. On the eve of Human Rights Day, we discuss threats to human rights globally, from state-sanctioned organ harvesting in China to lockdowns of the unvaccinated in Germany to COVID restrictions in the United States. This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Jan Jekielek.
All right, folks, again, that's American Thought Leaders. Be sure to check it out on Epoch TV. You can find the link to Epoch TV in the description below. And if you want to support Crossroads as well, it's a great way to do it. You can subscribe again to Epoch TV and also tell a friend or family member about it. All right, folks, that says jump into some questions. Let's see. First of all is SGLE Master. He said, question, even though Pfizer changed their definition of gain of function and say they have no documentation, don't you think others have made copies of their papers before the deletion? Natalie Winters, for one. So Natalie Winters of National Pulse, has been doing some great investigative research. I know her personally. She's a really just fantastic investigative reporter. She's done a lot of research also on different propaganda organizations tied to professors here in the U.S. She's done a lot of research on Dr. Fauci. Folks, there's a few different issues when you're dealing with Dr. Fauci and his relations to this research on gain of function. Epoch Times, we actually have a great show with Hans and Jeff Carlson. Folks, you can find that on Epoch TV. They go over a lot of these different stories, looking into the origin of the virus, looking into Dr. Fauci's different contracts. Basically, yes, you did have the issue that Dr. Fauci's organization was, by definition, helping finance this gain of function research happening in these Chinese laboratories. This is publicly known. The issue is just a technical detail where, again, they didn't, in their contracts, they don't actually use the phrase gain of function. They just define what gain of function is. It's like someone says, I mean, this is kind of a funny example, but if someone says, that accuses you of writing tree in a document, but you didn't write tree, you just described what a tree is. They could say that, folks, if you tried to deny you wrote about it, you probably still wrote about it, right? especially when you're dealing with scientific definitions of what something is. They scientifically define what it is and then deny they said it because they didn't use the name. That's the technicality with it. Cameron Bacon is up next. She said, Josh, you're great at maintaining impartiality as a journalist, trying to. You said, we can't technically prove there's an intentional effort to implode the global economy, but don't intentions of organizations like the World Economic Forum line up with that? That is true. The World Economic Forum has previously stated certain intentions to do something just like this, the Great Reset, resetting the global economy. It sounds like conspiracy, folks, but literally they're so open with it. It's almost embarrassing. They have videos on it. They have like promotional videos on their YouTube channel about it. And they talk about the current state of things in the US and the whole world at this point, and the lockdowns and so on, is really kind of pioneering this system that they envision becoming the new normal. And so, yeah, that's a good point on Cameron Bacon's part. That's a good point that they have actually stated the intention of doing it. They have stated their intention on doing it. The question we can't say for sure is whether the current situation is them doing it actively or if their actions and policies just aligning with it. We can't technically make that accusation, but what we can say is that, well, folks, if you say you want to do something and then you do the things that would create the thing that you said you previously want to do, you might have a pretty good legal case. If someone states their intention and, hey, I'd like to rob that neighbor over there, and then someone goes and robs the neighbor over there, you might say that's a suspect. If you say, for example, that you intend to go to the store and buy a certain good, and you go out your door and you walk those steps, and you just happen to buy that good in the store, you could say that you may have intended to do it based on your previous statements. And so technically, you could argue that there's a serious case in terms of suggesting they're doing it intentionally. Because again, they've stated the intention, the objective, and they're taking the steps through which to achieve that, although they're claiming the steps to achieve it are for something entirely different. They claim it's for public health and so on, right? If it went to court, if it went to court, there would be a serious case to accuse them on it, and frankly, it would have a good chance of winning, I'd say. Another question here from Gak Romer. He said, Josh, would you be willing to do a deep investigation into the corrupt EV and solar panel industrial complex, CCP slavery, Wall Street banks, U.S. government subsidies, environmental damage, payoffs to local governments? It is out of control. Actually, that is a really good suggestion. I will put that as my notes. Briefly, folks, I am beginning to transition back to doing some investigative reporting again. And actually, I'm going to start doing as well some of the interviews again. You might remember we did a lot of interviews before. I'd like to get out in the field again. I've been kind of analyzing what's wrong with journalism these days. I like doing these Q&As, of course. I like doing the live broadcasts, but I feel like there needs to be journalists on the field actually finding things and actually, getting these stories themselves, not just going over the stories other people report. Because I'd say in a lot of cases, the issue we have in this country is that the people going out and finding information and presenting it to us, there's not a whole lot of them. And the ones going out and doing that oftentimes have their own slant. Few exceptions to that. I'd say Epic Times is a great exception to that. But I would hope to be able to contribute to that a lot more. And so I'm getting out on the field a lot more. You might see me traveling a lot more. I'm going to be doing a lot more interviews. And I'll keep you updated on it. I'm thinking of how to transition with this and thinking of how to do it best. But on that note, folks, if you do have questions, if you do have ideas for things that need to be investigated, let me know. Gak Romer, this is a great question, or a great suggestion, actually, on this, because I traveling through Texas and other parts, and even looking back at Chinese economic theft, for example. Remember when Barack Obama, under the Obama administration, sanctioned these 5 Chinese hackers? That was Unit 61398. Remember when he did that? And of course, went after these Chinese military hackers who were breaching U.S. systems. One of the documents that came out talked about how, for example, they had stolen the solar panel information and then use the stolen solar panel information to go and build their own solar panels through a Chinese company, which competed with the company in the US that they stole it from in the first place, and actually got state contracts beating the company they robbed using its own designs. There's stuff like this that happened in the US and continues to happen in the US, and it seems like government officials don't really seem to care about it. There is a lot of fraud, I would say, especially in the energy industry, especially as it relates to the Chinese Communist Party, and especially as it relates to some other things around this. And so that is a great suggestion for an investigation. And on that note, folks, again, if you do have suggestions for things you need to be investigated, let me know. I am looking for stories. Dave Johnson is asking, he said, Josh, have you heard the FOIAD document by Siri Glimstad that there's no label or license on FDA for pregnant women to use the vaccine? Any opinions? I haven't seen the FOIA document on that, but I do know, as we've discussed previously, you might remember our interview, I believe, with Rex Tillerson, where we go over some of the medical recommendations written on the vaccines themselves. Because these vaccines, if you actually go over the recommended uses, they have their own documentation, which does suggest who should take it and who should not. One of the issues you have is that government mandates, local mandates, military mandates, and so on aren't really taking those recommendations into consideration in some regards. On that note, one example with the military, I have heard of the military granting some exemptions for the vaccines for pregnant women. I don't know how widespread that is, but I have been told directly by people in the military that they do know of cases where women have gotten the exemption. It's unclear how wide that is. It's also unclear how the FDA is dealing with that. You do have in some parts of the world much, much higher levels of stillbirths. And people are, we can't prove it yet because there's no research on it, but there's tangential research that it may be related to this because there's such a huge spike in it recently. Stephen Mazur, you're cracking me up. You said, people only think of yourselves. Think about Pfizer and other drug companies. Drug company profits matter. Yeah. Yeah. And also the politicians investing huge amounts of money in them. How are politicians going to make money if they can't mandate vaccines that make them a lot of money? This is just, it's just, common, basic knowledge. Why would they not create mandates to force people to take a vaccine and redirect state funding on things that they directly profit from? That's politics. How else would politics work, right? Cindy Looney 5, you're asking, Josh, have you heard Dr. David Martin's detailed information about all of the patents Pfizer/Moderna created over the years as they constructed the COVID-19 biological war weapon and simultaneously created these vaccines, also weapons? I'm not familiar with Dr. David Martin, but I have seen some of the documentation of the different processes they used to create the vaccines, the different legal requests they were doing, and how it did develop. And yes, there is kind of a strange, I'd say a real strange development process with this, which a lot of people are taking. And based on the trends, even individuals like Bill Gates and so on, based on the trends of strange incidents, they're suggesting that either these people are like basically oracles, that they kind of predicted things perfectly, that things would happen exactly as they did, or maybe they had some behind the scenes information that maybe this whole thing was going to be happening. It's a lot that needs to be looked into with this, because frankly, some of the different, let's say, drills they were holding, some of the different international tests they were holding, some of the different processes of registering patents, specifically around mRNA vaccines. A lot of these things do suggest that, well, they were either at the exact right place at the exact right time at the exact moment, or maybe they kind of knew something was going to happen. It's not quite clear. Maybe they're just, oracles and they just predict things and disasters just magically manifest around the things they're developing. Or maybe there's something more to it. It's not quite clear. I see more butts. He said, Josh, did you hear that there are 3 dead people of the ERIC board of directors? I have not heard this. Those of you coming in right now, ERIC is the company that is managing a lot of the voter registration data and is preventing the information from being available to the public, which is normally required under federal law to be made available to the public. Because, again, they're a private company and they say they don't need to provide it legally. Ray Huey, you said, Josh, have you any information about the Novavax COVID-19 vaccine approval? I have seen that the Novavax treatment has been approved. I believe I didn't go over the whole thing, but I do believe it's like a pre-treatment, not necessarily something to take afterwards. It appears to be a vaccine. I did see some reports on it. I didn't fully look into it, so I don't have all the details on that. Sith Def 93 said, where is the funding to defend against the countries who have the abilities now to launch a low-level EMP that will disable our entire energy/electric grid? So on that note, yeah, that's a huge issue. When you're asking about the funding to do it, folks, there have been repeated attempts in the U.S. to get different technologies to protect the U.S. electric grid from EMP, electromagnetic pulse attacks. They have been repeatedly pushed mainly by Republicans and repeatedly stopped mainly by Democrats. On that note, the Chinese Communist Party has an active warfare program that has this as one of its cornerstones. The warfare program they have is called the Assassin's Mace program, also translated as the Trump Card program. Specifically in their documents, including documents that have been made available under the U.S. Army, based, analyzing what the CCP was doing. The CCP has talked about the use of what they call HEMP attacks, high Earth orbit nuclear detonation, which basically, rather than hitting a country with a nuclear weapon, you're detonating it in orbit, specifically to have the EMP fry the country's electric grid. The Chinese Communist Party has directly talked about that as being one of the core things it would do to the United States. That would also do something, for example, like frying the different satellites, which also kind of destroy the eyes and ears of the U.S. military, disabling things like GPS, missile targeting, and so on, which means basically we lose our core military capabilities. The Assassin's Mace program, which is, again, a Chinese Communist Party warfare program, one which Michael Pillsbury, in his book, I believe, called Crouching Tiger, wrote about, is the only, when he tested it during red team battles, Pentagon red team battles, where they're doing these military games, the time that he tested it during these war games was the only time the United States lost a simulated war of that type, was when he applied the Chinese Communist Party's Assassin's Mace program during these games. Something the CCP has openly stated they intend to use against the United States if a war were ever to take place. They also call it the little white rabbit of the Chinese Communist Party, notably. And yeah, it includes a lot of different things like that, including as well microwave weapons. The documents that I've seen personally have pretty horrifying details about how they were testing these things on animals, specifically the effects it has on like the eyes and skin of small animals. It's pretty horrifying stuff. And yeah, that's what a war with China would look like. And there's been different types of analysis on the damage a EMP attack on the U.S. would do. Some analysis says that within a very short time, I believe less than a year, you'd have something like 90% of the population die. Different takes on that. But yeah, basically, the CCP has openly said that they would do this to the U.S. through a surprise attack, which is what the Assassin's Mace program relies on. They've openly said that they would do it in a warfare scenario. Republicans have repeatedly tried to put safeguards in place to minimize or eliminate the threat of such an attack. It's been Democrats repeatedly who have prevented those safeguards from being put into place. Take it for what you will. Just generally, that's how it's worked. All right, folks, a lot to go into. I want to talk about some other stories still, so I'll just do one more question, then we'll jump into it. real quickly, Pater Thomas, so Peter Thomas' son, I believe. He said, "Hey Josh, did you hear about the LA County Sheriff claim that China likely is going to get DNA data from the COVID-19 tests?" I did see that there's been talk about that. Based on the information I've seen, they've already been doing this. Based on the information I've seen, the Chinese Communist Party or Chinese laboratories has already been getting the data from the COVID-19 testing kits. Because the data, just like the different ancestry type things, is being processed in Chinese laboratories. There's also been some overlap with this of some of the big names we know here in the US working with companies in China to get this data. This again goes back to biometrics and the potential use for things like bioweapons. Remember something interesting, those of you who might think this is conspiracy, you can watch the interview we previously did with Gordon Chang, talking about how the Chinese Communist Party was, in fact, even in their own openly, publicly reported documents, talking about creating bioweapons using this type of data, specifically to target different DNA strands unique to different racial groups. You could, for example, target the white race or other races, or make a virus that may not target the yellow race or the Chinese DNA strands. This is something the CCP has openly talked about. They do have documents on it. Again, you can watch the interview we did with Gordon Chang talking specifically about this previously. Also, on that note, just to nail it down a bit further, remember when information was coming out that these different ancestry programs were working with laboratories in China, these DNA tests to learn your ancestry, that they were working with labs in China to process this data. If you take one of these things, that your DNA information is being sent to these Chinese laboratories. Shortly after that information came out, the United States actually forbade military personnel from taking those types of tests, which did raise some questions over whether these two things were related, right? All right, folks, that says, jump into some more stories. Something interesting has now happened in San Diego, which is Antifa, anti-fascist action. Antifa, folks, members of it, or groups of people affiliated with it, are now facing charges of criminal conspiracy. Very interesting update. This means that they may have been conspiring with each other to commit criminal acts. And if this case goes through, and if these people are in fact found guilty, this could set some precedents for other parts of the U.S. This is San Diego. This is California. San Diego, where I'm from actually originally, tends to be more conservative because it is a military town. But folks, it says this. It says it was the most violent day in the history of Pacific Beach. Dozens of Antifa supporters showed up at a pro-Trump rally. The event hadn't started, and according to reports, Antifa supporters attacked everyone in sight. In other words, carried out acts of violence and appeared to have done so in a coordinated fashion that suggests that there was a criminal conspiracy. Now, this week, the San Diego County District Attorney formally charged at least 8 members of Antifa with felonies, including criminal conspiracy. Now, we'll see where this goes. We'll see if there's more happening with this. But this could set a nice precedent for other parts of the U.S. in terms of prosecuting Antifa if they choose to carry out acts of violence like this, because they are, by definition, a gang, by definition, insurrectionists, if you talk about their ideologies of overthrowing the system, including, for example, in Seattle with the Chaz or Chop site. They're also a group that openly states its intention to use violence and then does carry out acts of violence based on the previously stated intentions to do so, working in conjunction with each other, which would show a criminal conspiracy by most definitions. Now, will they be charged with this? Will these charges go through? Will they be found guilty? And will other parts of the country adopt this? We will have to see. But folks, I'll keep you updated as we get more information on it. Now, I want to talk to you about something that was happening in the EU, because there was a viral story going around. It was the Post Millennial had it, saying that the European Union, basically, that they were saying that they plan to essentially roll back the Nuremberg Code. in order to put forward these different vaccination mandates. There's a lot of misinformation going around on that story, but interestingly, the misinformation appears to be coming from these so-called fact checkers who are claiming the story itself is misinformation. And folks, this is a great example of the play on words that some of these companies take. The play on words that some of these media companies and media truth checking companies take when they try to claim something as fake, themselves actually using propaganda and misinformation tactics while doing so. Let me show this to you. Let me explain how this works. Now, interestingly, this is post-millennial. It's an interesting story, actually. Let me go over it. It says, shocking. As Austria locks down its unvaccinated people, critics say European Union leaders support throwing out the Nuremberg Code. And it says, Ursula von der Leyen, president of the European Commission, told the press on Wednesday that she believes it to be both understandable and appropriate for the EU member nations to consider mandatory vaccinations. This after it became clear that a full third of Europeans have yet to undergo the jab, according to the BBC. Now, at this Brussels press conference, she addressed the issue of mandatory vaccinations, saying the matter, quote, needs discussion. This needs a common approach, but it is a discussion that I think has to be led. Now, this in light of the Omicron variant of COVID-19, which is now detected in 12 different member nations of the EU. Now, when they're talking about mandating this vaccine, this led to some people to offer comparisons between forced vaccinations and the provisions in the Nuremberg Code. In other words, after this president of the European Commission came out, this EU official came out and suggested they should mandate this, critics were noting that this may violate the Nuremberg Code. They were saying this may be a violation of it. In November, Austria announced that mandatory COVID and vaccination processes would be on the horizon, with the government, quote, preparing the legal groundwork for a general vaccine mandate to come in February 2022, according to The Guardian. Now, a bit further on this, let me explain why this matters. It was after this that von der Leyen made her remarks, leading some to say that she is in favor of scrapping provisions in the Nuremberg Code. According to that code, drafted after the atrocities committed by the Nazis during the Second World War, people must be allowed to give consent. They must be allowed to give consent for experimental medical treatment. And so prominent critics such as Dr. Jordan Peterson considered forced vaccinations of an experimental vaccine as being equivalent to the needing people that you can't force it, you can't mandate, you need to have consent for experimental medical treatments. Dr. Peterson was saying that forced vaccination under severe penalty could be analogous to scrapping the Nuremberg Code on human medical experimentation. And so, in other words, the EU official did not say that. They were not saying that was the post-millennial. The article did not say that they were claiming a European Union official said they want to get rid of the Nuremberg Code. They were saying that they were making statements, and different critics on those statements were saying that their statements and the policies they're suggesting could be a violation of the Nuremberg Code. Here's how the fact checkers framed it. And this is important for understanding the plays on words that these different companies use and how different media organizations, different companies, then take these so-called fact checkers and write articles ironically posting misinformation under the guise of challenging misinformation. This is how they framed it. Listen to this. This is PolitiFact. It says, a viral story misrepresented comments by the leader of the European Commission about mandatory COVID-19 vaccination. The story in the post-millennial that wanted to show you folks included the headline, shocking. In the wake of Austria's drastic lockdowns of vaccinated people, EU chief calls for throwing out Nuremberg Code. Now, this is what it says. The beginning of the December 2nd story says, Ursula von der Leyen, the head of the EU Commission, told the press on Wednesday that she is in favor of scrapping the long-standing Nuremberg Code and forcing people to get vaccinated against COVID. And on their grounds for saying that this article is false, it says, but von der Leyen did not say the Nuremberg Code should be disregarded and did not mention the treaty during the press conference. You see what they did here, folks? The post-millennial article, the one we just now discussed, did not say that von der Leyen said the word Nuremberg Code. It did not say that she said we should get rid of the Nuremberg Code. It said that her statements and her proposed policies could be a violation of the Nuremberg Code, and that critics were saying that, not her. So, in other words, they made something up, they falsified the nature of the accusation, and then used the falsified rewriting of this story essentially to claim that the story was false. They are themselves spreading misinformation. They are themselves lying to people, and they are themselves claiming a story was false and made false statements by themselves making false statements. And this is how these political fact checking organizations tend to operate. It's tricks like these plays on words they use, that I think is important to recognize. Because ironically, the misinformation machines are websites like this, like the way that PolitiFact misrepresented the post millennials article in order to again spread what is in fact misinformation. And then the misinformation they themselves spread gets picked up by other news organizations, which go around claiming that this has been debunked, that it's a debunked claim and it's conspiracy. This is how they operate. It's important to note this. And again, this is a very common play on words that they use. All right, folks, that said, it's getting late, so we'll call it a night here. A lot of stories, as always, folks, a lot to go into. A lot of negative stuff, unfortunately. I have mentioned, though, if you want something positive, we do have a great new program on Epic TV. Again, this is our uncensored, our new video platform, video on demand. Folks, if you like pleasant music, if you like watching pleasant performing arts, dance, be sure to check out Shen Yun Creations. Shen Yun is a performing arts company based in New York. They're trying to restore the traditional dance and music heritage of traditional Chinese culture. And interestingly, they are banned from performing in China. They're not allowed to go to China because the Chinese Communist Party really, really does not like them. And the reason they really don't like them is because Shen Yun is restoring the dance and traditions and culture that the CCP has tried to destroy. This is the authentic, I'd say, nature, the authentic underlying nature of what traditional Chinese culture was. It's beautiful, folks. You want something positive in your lives, you want to listen to some nice music, be sure to check it out. Again, that's Shen Yun Creations. I'll show you a trailer at the end of this video. But folks, again, also, we do now have our own, a new channel, which hopefully will help us get around the YouTube censorship. That's Crossroads Highlights. Be sure to check it out. Please subscribe, and please tell your friends and family about it. Also, folks, real quick as well, we're keeping our book of the month going. Book of the month for December, The Plot to Change America. And that is how identity politics is dividing land of the free. It's by author Mike Gonzalez. This is the Crossroads book of the month for December. So if you want to join our book of the month, pick up a copy. And folks, we'll see if we can get Mike Gonzalez on at the end of the month for another Q&A like we did just recently with Tim Barton, author of our last book of the month, which was The American Story. All right, folks, that said, please take care of yourselves as always. It's always great being here. Appreciate you all, folks. That said, as always, again, stay informed and stay free. Thank you.